to this edition of CIC's event, Unlocking Conversational AI, Exploring the Power of ChatGPT. With us today we have Mr. Chandrasekharan, or VC as he is called, the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Congruent Solutions. And joining him will be Rangarajan Vasudevan, co-founder and chief data officer of Lentra AI. Welcome both of you. Let me just give you a brief profile of our speakers today. V. Chandrasekharan is an industrial engineer, technology and management professional with 30 plus years experience. He is a serial entrepreneur. He co-founded two respectable organizations, Congruent Solutions, which is a leader in products and services for retirement plan industry, and Secova e-Services, India's first benefits BPO company, which he has exited in 2019. Congruent Solutions is a company focused on building products and offering services for the US retirement plan industry. VC currently serves as a co-founder, director and chief strategy officer of Congruent and manages the products division. He is actively engaged in mentoring the product and business teams towards realizing the product vision and roadmap to take the leadership position in the retirement space. And his work includes work on AI, ML, and data analytics. The key strength and focus has been the ability to manage business, serving global customers and delivering services efficiently, leveraging global talent. Of particular mention is the experience of enabling and transacting business in the Indo-US business corridor. He is also busy mentoring a few startups and has been deeply involved with the art and culture of South India and also in studying and preserving history and heritage. He's been part of promoting classical music and folk dance forms and is actively involved in promoting awareness of local history and culture among the citizens in Chennai. Welcome, VC. Please join us on stage. Ranga or Rangarajan Vasudevan is the co-founder and chief data officer of Lentra AI, which is India's fastest growing lending cloud SaaS firm. He did big data and data science before it was fashionable, building data native applications across industries and geographies over 17 plus years. He joined Lentra when his customer intelligence company, the Data Team, was acquired in June 2022. Prior to the acquisition, the Data Team had been around for 7 years, building an AI-enabled enterprise customer analytics platform with a multi-million-dollar run rate. He previously served as principal consultant, big data with Teradata Corporation in their international region, helping companies adopt data science at large scale on best-of-breed platforms. He had joined Teradata via the acquisition of Aster Data Systems, where he was a founding engineer and co-invented a company defining patented pattern recognition algorithm. He was a recipient of both the Distinguished Engineer R&D and Consulting Excellence Awards at Teradata. He has degrees in computer science from the University of Michigan and IIT Madras and contributes back to his alma mater actively as a visiting faculty on big data. Welcome, Ranga. Please join us. The topic, of course, I leave it to the eminent speakers of the day, but it has been of wide interest to laymen like us. We've been trying to figure out what this ChatGPT is all about, whereas our kids are basically into it every day and they are lecturing us on why we are old fogies, old fossils who don't know what technology has enabled us to do. So to demystify this topic and take us through the basics of emerging technologies, and not only the power of AI and power of ML, etc., we would like to hear about the ethical issues, the moral issues which surround this topic of artificial intelligence. So let us, without further ado, hand over the stage to VC. You go first or Ranga goes first? I go first. Right. So over to them for an interesting evening on artificial intelligence and conversational AI.
वाकर्ताविव संप्रक्तौ Vagartha Pradipataye Jagataf Pitarau Vande Parvati Parameshwaro. First of all, let me thank Chennai International Center to invite me to be a speaker. Looking at the list of eminent speakers who've been in the past, it's a big privilege and honor to be here with Ranga to share my thoughts on the subject. I would like to particularly thank Prakash Challa, trustee, and Ramki must be here, for approaching me to talk about this subject here. And of course, I started this special invocation of Kalidasa in Raghuvamsha because it is a wonderful piece of poetry really illustrating what language does. Because, I mean, today we have modern day linguists who talk about a lot of concepts, and Kalidasa says, what is the difference between Vak and Artha and all that. So we'll talk about that. I think one of the things is, as I study this subject, in fact, more than practice, it's a really abiding interest to see what's happening in this field. It's fascinating. It's totally fascinating. I had a lot of friends who've been referring him a lot of material. If you go back and read some of the stuff in the 4th, 5th century of either Panini or, you have Bhatrahari, right? It's amazing, amazing. In fact, some of the modern concepts which are being used today in the generative AI technology is being spoken in those texts. It's completely mind-blowing. How much I wonder how they could abstract and think so deeply about these subjects. So actually the whole thing started, my interest started, I've been following AI. You would have, I don't know how many of you have heard about Geoffrey Hinton. Geoffrey Hinton is one of the luminary scientists who was actually pretty much, who defines the father of modern AI, particularly the deep learning side of it. He was in Google, the most celebrated. He invented a very unique process called backward propagation. That's perhaps the central thing for many of the ChatGPT and many of the large language models you see. And one day he said that this is really becoming too much. And then he said that he left the organization. Along with him, many other engineers did as well. Mo Goddard being another one. So, and ever since he's been evangelizing about controlling this technology. And that really caught my attention. I've been following a whole lot. I hope to actually share with you some of the learnings that I've had out of actually following many of these people. And 90 days ago, actually, approximately, I gave a similar lecture in another location. And I thought that, it was going to be easy. I just used the same PPT, same content, and then come and face you guys. Incredibly, I had to sit and change a whole lot of things about my presentation, because the speed at which it is going is mind-blowing. Right? I'll share with you some of this stuff. So how many of you have tried your hands on ChatGPT? How many of you know about ChatGPT? Almost all, right? How many of you have tried your hands on ChatGPT? It's a fascinating thing to try, okay? And I'll try and see if I can, I'm going to, for those who have not done that, I'm going to try and see how I can introduce to this. So actually, if you have to get into ChatGPT, it's very, very simple. Get into the site called chat.openai.com. Okay, if you search, Google takes you there. And then you'll get this page, log in or sign up. The moment you say sign up, you're just going to get, it's going to ask you, you have a Google account and all that. So I don't want to go through this whole thing, right? You guys can figure this out. So what I did was actually last night just to show, because Chandramouli said that it may be a good idea to just show how the whole thing looks and all that. I said, what can I just show them? I played around. So this is something which I played around with yesterday, right? Yeah. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, just to give you the power of this whole thing. Okay, this is the question I asked. I gave no background to ChatGPT. I just said, can you develop a fundraise plan for Chennai International Center, increase its social and educational outreach? Okay, that was the question. It came with a whole lot of things, and it is more like a standard template of a business, any business book and all that. So I got bored about the whole thing. I said, I simply went to CIC site, pasted about what is CIC about the whole thing into the ChatGPT. I didn't do anything else. Then it says, based on the information you provided above, here is another version of the whole thing. Okay. So it just gave me a better donor engagement strategy. You can have a whole lot of things. I further went and said, improve the plan with what CIC does. What are the activities? And then I pasted the same thing, what we do, right? Similarly, in successive rounds, I just pasted that and then said, give me the better plan, give me a better plan. And finally, it gave a nice plan. I said, what is a charter and so on, right? And finally said, hey, listen, why you not included government funding in this whole thing? Can we go for government funding? And it just surprisingly told me, government is a great way of thinking. You have to align with the Ministry of Culture or Ministry of HRD, and then see that you have plans and things which are aligning with that. But see that it's a risky one, because you have to open yourself to a whole lot of public information and stuff like that, audit and so on. It's just brilliant, okay? Till then it had no context of CIC, right? Because all data on which ChatGPT has been trained stops somewhere around 2021, right? In fact, you'll be surprised. There are large organizations which maintain data as of 2014, because after that only all that social media nonsense and whole lot of manufactured content and all that's been there, right? So, and then I went here to a new panel and said, new chat, and said, what do you know about CIC, right? Now that it has gathered all the information from me, it is giving you a beautiful summary of what CIC is. And I was very surprised, because initially it did not have any idea about the whole thing. Today I was talking to Ranga and said, Ranga, this is what happened, but I don't have another account. I don't want to expose one more account. Can you go to your account and check out what it is telling about CIC? What it has done is it has taken the information that I have given, and it gives him a very good picture of what CIC is about. So that's how it works. It is learning constantly with every interaction that somebody is doing with it. So I'm going to actually demonstrate to you. I think I have a connectivity here. Yeah. So one of my very close friends is a Professor Godabarsh Mishra. He is a dean in Nalanda University, a great scholar in philosophy. I mean, he's a professor of philosophy and Sanskrit. So he didn't have any idea about ChatGPT. He came to see me and I told him about this. He was saying, listen, I would like to learn. So he came home. So I said, I'll demonstrate to him, and said, let's compare the philosophies between Shankara and Madhvacharya. Then he told me, okay, he told me, just let's try Abhinava Gupta because he's more difficult personality, not much content available, let's see what it does. So it's generating. It already says what is Shankara's concept about Advaita and what is Abhinava Gupta's whole thing about the whole thing, right? And I just told him, he was quite flabbergasted. He read the whole thing and said, hey, listen, I will have to be worried about what students are saying and I have to be prepared when they bring something like this. Then I said, make a condensed one with 100 words. This will may take a little while because ChatGPT is not very good in mathematical stuff. Yeah, there it is, right? And then I just told him, because he's from Oriya, I told him, I said, make this as an Oriya. or today it's not giving. Let's try in Tamil. So that day it made it in Oriya, and I can't read Oriya, I can't read Telugu as well. Somebody here who can read Telugu can confirm that it really indeed makes sense. Okay? But he told me reading Oriya and said, this is really brilliant. It's like one of my scholars writing the same thing for me in Oriya. Right? So that's really the power of ChatGPT. And I must thank a whole lot of teachers through the net who actually contributed to my understanding of this subject. You all know Harari being one of the biggest, okay, with his work on Sapiens and Homo Deus and all his works. And of course, Geoffrey Hinton, Sam Altman, Mo Gaudet, and of course, Noam Chomsky and Steven Pinker as well, right? I also would like to particularly acknowledge my close friend who's an author and scholar who introduced me to this really delightful thing of linguistics and pointed to me a whole lot of resources. So I'll go back to the presentation now. If you have any questions or anything so far. So it's whether ChatGPT, is it a utopia or a dystopia? That's the subject, and that's how I really call it. So my involvement in AI actually started way back when I started nearly my business career. And I was fascinated by, at that time, AI and expert systems. It was the days of Marvin Minsky. And I used to attend one semester course. I attended one semester course with Professor Mahabala. That's how I got introduced to this whole thing. I've been following ever since. And Marvin Minsky is attributed to the word AI or the artificial intelligence. He was once asked, so what do you see as the future of artificial intelligence and how it's going to help or affect humanity? He said, it's going to be great, it's going to be taking over the whole thing. The only thing I do not know is whether it will have the interests of human species in mind. Okay, that was his answer at that time. I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago. I think it was a day of, at that time, the approach to AI was more from a point of view of our logical thinking and reasoning, of how we make rule sets and how actually we come to certain conclusions. It used to be called expert systems and all that. From there, fast forward to the current era, the whole thing has changed topsy-turvy. So now the whole thing is about pattern recognition. It actually has to recognize patterns and predict, and which is pretty much like how we are trained. Because just imagine a child going initially, and then everything is new, right? All our visual inputs, it doesn't know what, it can't even say a leaf is a leaf. It's all a, smorgasbord of colors, right? And then boundaries. So we then start saying, hey, this is leaf, okay? So that's how actually the whole thing, so the current AI is pretty much mimicking the process with which we build our learning system, or learning model, or the language model, okay? So first, I think to have a really good grip and understanding, we need to understand what is the place of language for us, because most of us understand language in different terms and very simple terms, most of us. Like, if you ask somebody what is the language, they'll say English is a language, Tamil is a language, and so on, right? But I think it goes far, far deeper. And really, if you look at the linguists and brain researchers and currently what they are saying, language is actually organized in, you can say a language or a language model is more organizing knowledge in some fashion, which is retrievable in a very efficient way, and also how it takes inputs and processes it to understand the world. In other words, it is building a model continuously of all the senses that it is getting. And similarly, when I talk about it, I have to communicate. So I actually have to communicate my worldview. And then let's say when I talk to you, that should become, I share my worldview and it becomes integrated with whatever you have in your mind, right? So in a way, language is a very, very deep subject, because, and somebody like Noam Chomsky actually was really the father of modern linguistics. At 94, he talks about ChatGPT. Right? I mean, I have to really hang my head in shame, right? I mean, he's really on top of things. And he came up with this concept called biolinguistics. In other words, he argues that the very constructs and principles of language is very much part of our biomechanisms and DNA itself. So that is really a very deep thing, right? That's why, in fact, I relate to all my experiences. I used to go in the forest, and then, in one of the treks and all that, and suddenly you find monkeys calling, right? And then, the trekker who was with me, he said, it's actually announcing that there is a predator somewhere nearby walking along. So it is warning all the friendly species that, hey, beware, right? So it is only making frequencies of sounds, but it is read as a warning of a predator, and that is even part of the language that they have and communication that they have, right? So the very fact, now they say that language is very much a very essential part of human or any species survival, right? So that is the reason why people attach a whole lot of importance to studying linguistics. And really, let's look at it. We are born. Maybe my argument is, maybe I don't know my mother, I don't know my father, nobody actually, right? I know them because somebody pointed me, and that's got built in as a concept in my mind as a model, as part of my learning model. Without that, actually, a father won't be a father. And you can see that in real life, because there are so many people with foster parents, many decades would have gone, they wouldn't know that they were their biological parents or not, right? Maybe with the mother biological connection, I really do not know. But definitely, what we are today and how we perceive the world is nothing but a learning model which is actually constantly picking up and then labeling and then storing in some way. And then you are actually, then that becomes the thing. And interestingly, one of the things that, in Sanskrit they say nama and the nami, right? Nama and the nami means the word rose is not the rose. And a child, when it sees the rose, it actually experiences the rose without any concept, without anything. It sees the colors and all that, and it clearly can experience something. The moment you put in a concept to it, that's it. The programming has happened. Next time, oh, that's a rose. There ends the matter. Actually, you don't get into the experiential level at all, right? You're trapped. So that's how the mental model is constantly, we are wired biologically to make sense of what we are experiencing, what we are really dealing with, and gets into the whole thing. In fact, there is a lot of study done in the neuro field where, for instance, when you say a visual thing, most complex process is the visual process because it's too much information. The brain actually hardly sees a small fraction of what we actually is there as coming to it. It is actually immediately forming patterns based on its familiarity. And that's why when you go onto the road, you'll see somebody and say, hey, Raghu. He may not be Raghu, but the system read the features of Raghu and then foisted on it. That's the reality. So in one way, actually see what we experience of the world, the touch and all the senses, brilliantly engineered to give you an experience which is really could be illusory. The reality that we are talking about. So it's been engineered like that. It's the model which is functioning at any point of time. And interestingly, I told you my friend said, he asked me to read the Vakyapadiyam of Bhartrihari. I went and saw, I was just stunned. He speaks about one of the most important concepts for current day generation AI. It's called tokenization, because a language is never looked at as language. It tokenizes into components. So, and then it constructs whatever it says, right? So our AI today is nothing but a brilliant one with a big model that has been developed. Whatever inputs it gets as tokens, it contextually goes through a series of filters, right? How pretty much our brain does, right? In Sanskrit they talk about it. It's called Bedam. They call, Sajati, Vijati, and Swagata Bedam. That is, when you really look at understanding, let's say, trees, right? you understand trees as not being mammals. And you understand a mango tree as not being a banyan tree, right? That's the differentiation. And within the mango tree, a Banganapalli is different from some other species, right? And within the own Banganapalli, you say that's the one which has got some love letter written in that whole thing, right? And the other one doesn't. So it actually is organizing, and pretty much I think the way the neural nets are constructed is building layers and layers and layers of connections between all these discrete pieces, what you can call parameters, right? In a way to complex, construct, and then make sense of all that it makes. And then you'll be shocked to know there is no intelligence in the ChatGPT that you spoke about today. Perhaps there is no intelligence in us. That's the question I have, right? I mean, that's a question that I'm saying with. Because what ChatGPT does is nothing more than predicting what is the next word I should say. That's it, right? You've given a series of things, it's gone through its whole process of filters and layers and said, this is the concept, the first word I should say is so-and-so. And for this concept, the first word, what should be the second word? It predicts that. What should be the third word? It predicts that. So in real things, the sense that you get out of ChatGPT is not that of ChatGPT. It is something that you perceive from what ChatGPT throws at us, right? I hope I'm clear, right? I'll cover some, portion about what is really the power of ChatGPT today, right? I was telling you, like last time, when I made the presentation, I made an announcement at that time saying that there is a new language model called Falcon being developed. Hold your breath. It's from Abu Dhabi, right? Who on earth will think Abu Dhabi will come up with something like that, right? At that time, I was really surprised. And it had submitted for tests. And early publishing, material was saying it was performing better than ChatGPT, right? And this time when I went and said Falcon has fallen by the wayside, right? It's no longer in the reckoning at all, right? So it's really the speed, it's just 90 days, okay? So as we speak, to just give you an idea of the silently what big things are happening, MedPalm 2 is a product of Google they've released. It's basically a diagnostic tool, and they are actually doing test trials in Mayo clinics, okay? So in other words, very soon you will find, and they are really finding already, that it is able to diagnose better than an average doctor, right? ChatGPT, hands down, passes the, ULME tests as well as the Bar Association tests and everything without a problem, right? So I think the second thing is actually there is another competing product with ChatGPT today. It's got a company called Anthropic. They've come up with a product called Claude version 2. And the biggest difference is actually ChatGPT can take only a limited amount of input. This can take something like a 60,000 word input, right? Which is almost like a book. So you can actually go and say, I'll supply you with a Sujata short story. I'll also supply you with a Balakumaran short story. You make me a combined Sukumaran short story, right? It will definitely do. And it will be readable. It will really have a plot. It will have everything. So Claude is really in that realm in terms of taking larger inputs and making sense of the whole world. And the third thing I would want to talk about is Stable Diffusion. It's a company called Stability AI, a brilliant guy called Imad. He's a Bangladeshi engineer who's been in UK and US, and brilliant company. And Stable Diffusion has a unique product in the sense they have processed something like 100,000 gigabyte of images, okay? Look at the size. And then did that learning model, which has been crunched into a 2 gigabyte model. So, which means that the entire ability to look at images and the know-how of making all the images in anybody's thing, it's like, so it can dream up any image that you want, right? So it has got a text interface. You can go and say, for instance, Srikanth can say, hey, listen, I want Srikanth with hair, with acting with so-and-so, right? it'll immediately create that image. That's what they did. Somebody gave a text, this is in Wiki, says astronaut riding a horse. Please give me an image of an astronaut riding a horse. That is a generated image, okay? And it's really high quality with all the details that you can think of. So immediately, actually recently, Meta has released what's called a Llama, their own large language model called Llama version 2. And Stanford is saying that this is going to outbeat OpenAI pretty soon, right? The differentiation is you have the camp which says we have to control, etc. And Meta is a camp which says it has to be open source. Interestingly, there was a congressional hearing some time ago where Senator Blumenthal actually came in, and he was the chairman who was doing that. He really created a flutter. All that he said, let me tell you my opening remarks, and then plays a audio clip. It's like Blumenthal talking, giving the whole subject, and then he stops and finally says, I just got it out of ChatGPT. I threw it out to an AI engine which will actually got sample of my voice. It's just stitched together and gave me a Blumenthal lecture. Just imagine the power, right? I can have Biden commentary go through the net, right? I can have Modi commentary, whatever you want, in their own voices, right? As though they made statements. Today, if you really look at the state of memes and the false narratives that are going on, it will be exponentially more as we go along. And of course, they say that in 4 or 5, the entertainment industry is going to be like majorly impacted, right? In the sense, all the tools, in fact, the US movie industry has said, ban AI. We don't want AI to create any scripts, right? So there is a big movement. So they say in 4 to 5 years, I can just sit with the computer and give my own what I want as a story and put a few characters and make a full-length feature film all by myself for myself, right? 4 to 5 years time is what they are saying. It could be 7 years, 8 years, doesn't matter, but imagine the change that is going to hit us, right? And if you really look at the whole landscape, already there are people who are jumping into this opportunity, creating a whole wide array of tools. ChatGPT is one giant big model which is impressing, and then the idea of the large language model is being propagated by them being there and Llama being there and all that. But a whole lot of people are building very efficient models, because ChatGPT cannot work out of your phone. It has to work on the web, right? So they are making micro models. Really, the current engineers are making learning as a capability, building, and then very, very specific task-oriented things. So that's how our brain works. In the sense, there is no one solid model. Actually, there are micro models, and they're all interacting with each other. And you'll soon find in the world, you have a plethora of models engaging within each other. They may not even want to talk to you, right? And then creating something which is really out of the world, right? So, and why are we really worried about this whole thing, right? We had path-breaking changes in humanity. One is printing press, right? And because we were all oral communication, it couldn't be propagated, it has to be handwritten. Suddenly the printing press made a huge difference in humanity. Just similarly, if you really look at radio in terms of communication, reach out. And of course, the nuclear device. In fact, I would say that what Geoffrey Hinton, that day he left the job and came out, was the Oppenheimer moment. Actually, Oppenheimer said, looking at the whole first test explosion that he did, and said, what a terrible thing I've done to the humanity, right? But we don't know. Ever since nuclear devices came and proliferated, actually, there's been more peace than ever, right? So while the danger is there, we also don't know what the outcomes are going to be. So in this whole thing, just imagine that it's a printing machine. Printing machine, you give the content and you do all the typesetting or whatever it is, and then it will print. Just imagine a printing machine which will print its own content. That's what we are talking about with AI, right? And the nuclear device, You can hope to control, because a fissile material is a material. You can lock it. Can be made unavailable. But with AI, all that you need is a machine and the cloud. And somebody in the garage in Abu Dhabi can start really working and creating a model. Whether they're going to create something which is going to be beneficial or monstrous, we don't know. Right? How we are going to regulate it are questions. And incidentally, I think one context to set the context, our brain is the most efficient learning model, because it consumes something like 12 watts of power, and that's it, right? But it takes inputs from mother and surroundings. It takes a lifetime for you to build the tiny model that we have, which gives us the worldview and the experience, and then we pass on, right? So this whole AI thing is about putting a sigma of all models, perhaps in humanity, expressed through all the content that is there in the public domain, right? And they have, the way that they've trained is with a supercomputer which is like 50 times the size of the biggest supercomputer in NASA, right? And 50 megawatts of power as consumption for 3 months. That's the time it takes for a ChatGPT 4.5 to be trained. But it's only the training, right, which is really very expensive. But then actually then it becomes, usable. So what they have done, in other words, the power inequality is what we take a lifetime to learn, they put all of that in 3 months of concentrated, expensive stuff. And now that's saying, okay, all you guys, whatever you know of is all programmed here, you may or may not be relevant, right? So that could be the statement. So in other words, the way AI is going, from a grand scale of, let's say, human evolution, or life in general, Darwin's theory of evolution, if amoeba to T-Rex took billions of years, the AI's breakneck speed is just 4 years. Okay, so that's the real big change that is really happening, and that's the reason. In fact, you all know Harari says that this is the human operating system has been hacked. So it's pretty much like you've taken over kind of thing. I'm sorry I'm painting a very negative picture in a way, but that's not entirely true. Okay, what are the inherent problems in the whole thing? Because it's all trained out of material which is expressed textually and available in public domain. I went and actually tried on ChatGPT about Aryan invasion theory. Completely gives a white man's perspective, right? Completely on, I said, hey, listen, what about linguistic, theory? That from Sanskrit words are there in Persia, and it went to that. And he says, that's an alternative theory, and, you may want to consider it, it's still debatable, and, all that. So, in other words, actually speaking, one of the biggest problems in this whole thing is the inherent bias which is built in the whole training exercise. Hey, Ranga, I'm okay with time. Okay. So, the second thing is noise, right? There is a lot of content, and we don't know. For instance, humans have no way of saying why I am saying that this is a mouse, okay? That's the experience. I can't explain what features of that mouse I am seeing as mouse and all that, right? So, in similarly on the images, there is no way, it can't explain why it is inferring something from all the inputs that it's getting. And there is a lot of noise. In the sense, you don't know what is the noise. Like, they would have trained on thousands. I'll give you an example of how noise can really affect. And there's no explainability. The last point, which is the most important point people are trying to address, is called alignment. A very debatable one, because they say we need a system which is aligned with the human interests, right? So what is alignment? They have what's called reinforcement learning with human input, right? Human feedback, RLHF they say. But the moment you give human input, what you are really doing is creating a bias, right? Actually speaking, therefore it's not free. Therefore it's not creative. You are actually going to, so you don't know whether which is one. And the speed at which it is going, for instance, recently OpenAI announced that nearly 20% of all their resources are going to be used only for alignment. They think that the super intelligent systems that are coming up in future, you can't even have human feedback to train it. You need another AI systems to actually train like the humans to work with it. So they are really investing on technology to create systems that can make sure that the alignment is happening. So this is, I just want to tell you that on the noise part, right, out of say 50, 60,000 images that they've processed, let's say one image is like one odd image, right? Then immediately the van is recognized as a giraffe for some reason. Nobody knows why. But unless you clean it up and remove those noise or which images which are not there, the predictability of the whole thing is in really question. And that could be true of us also, we don't know. So let's say they had a data called CIFAR data set, 50,000 objects, and it was classifying everything it saw like a yacht 84% of the time. They just removed 9 images out of it. 84% became 34%. Just 9 images. And if when you're training with a large data set, you don't know which one is going to give you the accuracy, right? So, which is the noise elimination is a very, very big subject. So, for instance, you have a self-driving car, you have a stop sign, you can actually program it for positives. Let's say somebody paints a graffiti on it, right? Which is real world, right? You can have a graffiti. You don't know whether it's going to interpret as a stop sign. It may be actually trying to go, but it may not collide. But it may not follow the rules, right? Okay, I think one of the things, I'll quickly wind up. I think one of the things is just imagine today in a world where so much of social media memes and content is generated. And let's say for the 2024 elections, let's say AI bots are let loose for giving the narratives, right? Just imagine it can be true. There are going to be several millions of us who will really be taken into it. So what is going to be the dominant narrative if it is let loose, right? So that is a very big question. Democracy itself could be in question, seriously, particularly when the power is in few hands, right? Clearly, ChatGPT, what it was 3 months ago to now, already I can see the bias because they've controlled. They said, I asked them, on the Aryan invasion theory, I said, why are you being diplomatic? Just be straight shooting to me, right? He says, no, I've been actually asked by OpenAI to be diplomatic because, and so on and so forth. It says that, right? So it is biased because it's in control of few people. So it is going to really divide the world because not all are going to have this technology. Just imagine Silicon Valley and a few guys between Google and a few guys are going to have. And they will determine the narrative of the whole species, pretty much, right? And what do poor guys in Africa who can't even afford any research as far as this is concerned? Therefore, actually in future, if some government, particularly for India, big thing to definitely invest in this technology and at least be ahead of, we're being chasing and be somewhere there in terms of what they are saying is it's not that AI is going to kill humans. It's the humans with AI knowledge and capability is going to kill other humans, okay? So therefore, it's better if you have to be on the right side, we should have the AI and the people, right? So, and how many of you have seen, actually I remember my old days when I used to drive to my office, I used to see all big hoardings. I used to be really scared because there'll be scaffolding, people precariously hanging and painting. One guy will paint the white one day, second guy will come and do some outlining, third guy will come and fill up. It'll take about 10 days for a hoarding to be finished, right? And every day I'll watch it and I'll always be scared because there is no protection, nothing. Guy will be hanging on a scaffolding and then doing this. Suddenly I go to US and work for a few years and come back. 3M has come, Flex is there. No, none of those guys are there. And I had a few guys whom I've spoken to. Some of them have become drivers, scavengers, right? Some of them drank away to glory and dead, right? That can happen to a large set population of us. For instance, one of the things is doctors, just without being specialists, general doctors, lawyers. They predict that white collar jobs are going to be wiped out much more, right? And there is a prediction that you can have an overall reduction in employment by a factor of 30%. And in some areas, it could be as much as 90%, right? So that's the kind of prediction. Just imagine the catastrophe. And I think all of us have to be, if that really comes true, we have to be prepared to say, I'll hang my boots, I'll have a universal basic income somehow worked out, I'll get my money, let me have a holiday all the time. I think that's the way we may have to settle. I think, look at it like, even today there are a lot of legal issues about the ChatGPT thing, right? So our legal systems are such that you have copyright provided you make a material, right? When I write a material, it is copyrighted to me, it is attributable because I really wrote it, right? But I write it with all the knowledge that I have had and then expressing it. And I'm writing word by word. That's what ChatGPT is doing, right? Can you say that, whose rights is it then, right? So we have a whole lot of dilemmas and questions about legal systems, economic systems, how it's going to really affect big time. And that's the reason we had a large group of, with Geoffrey Hinton himself, they signed a big letter, some of the biggest researchers and scientists and business guys and people who are really more worried about the human race. They said, we need a 6-month moratorium, no development on AI. Let's take stock and then see what controls that we need to bring in terms of governance, in terms of what we should do. And there are two camps. One camp says it has to be completely open sourced, right? Because you are saying that by governance, we are saying we want a clean society. In life, nothing is clean. Without the bad guys, good guys also won't be there. So the open source guy says, just let loose. There'll be bad guys, there'll be a predominant good guys. And some balance will remain, is one side of the other side of the argument. So, some parting thoughts. Actually, one of the things about AI is, I feel, in the human system, like for instance, when I go on the road and somebody is falling and hurt, when somebody falls and gets hurt, what's our first feeling? Empathy. No, that's all later. The first immediate reaction that happens in you is, right? Actually, you feel the same pain virtually at that time. And there are very complex mechanisms to say that the hurt is not on you. And therefore, it puts a kind of a barrier not to feel the entire stuff. So, they call mirror neurons and, all that kind of stuff, right? So, for the intelligence, there are other control mechanisms in the bio life, right? This AI doesn't have any of this. In fact, they gave an example saying, you give an instruction to the AI saying, go and make the most efficient pin making factory in the world, and here is $50. And they've actually done the whole exercise. Somebody has written saying, it first went and put $50 in the market, it gamed the market and started getting more and more money, and first went and acquired a pin making factory, and said, what is all your sources? I'll go and acquire all your sources. They said, I'll have to go and after the mines. It converted got all the iron ore mines to itself, and then said, the factory space is not enough. I'll go and convert. We don't need textile. We don't need anything else. Convert them to pin factory, right? The whole world was filled with pins, right? So that could be, that's a real extreme, right? So one last question is, are we really intelligent? Because this is a question that I was fascinated with, saying frogs did not find and invent by their own volition a system that could threaten their own life or dominance, right? They may have been taken over by some other predatory species. That's different. That's nature's balance. But they didn't volitionally create. So are we intelligent or frogs are intelligent is the question, right? So, and finally, so one of the things is actually one of the readers, I was very piqued by this, saying I think should we call it AI should be whether it is artificial intelligence or alien intelligence. Thank you.
So while that comes up, a few things I think, just picking up from what BC was also sharing, I'm here actually going to talk about grounding AI, right? I think VC set the stage in the sense of the potential and the ability for AI to be way more powerful than where it is right now. So I'm here to play the devil's advocate and say there are a lot of things that need to be still worked out. So don't need to be as alarmed or as excited about the possibilities. I guess it's more work in progress. A lot of things that
It's feeding the mic.
yeah, sure.
It's going online.
Yeah, so a lot of what we need to do is, take it with a pinch of salt. Like I think some of the other major experts in the AI field, the folks who didn't sign the letter that VC was referring to, they are actively warning us that AI fear mongering is also very much part and parcel of what's happening in the media today, right? And we need to be aware of that, and we need to take a balanced view of where things stand today versus what's potentially possible at a much later point in time. So some of the points related to the cost associated with AI, I mean, they are very valid. But then again, I think we need to think about who can afford those costs, right? Some companies definitely can, the big companies like Google and Facebook, etc. But I think there are also ways in which the cost can be managed, the ways in which you can trade off, thank you, ways in which you can trade off costs versus benefits, right? And that's the bigger policy making arena that we're all part of as society, as citizenry, as governments, right? So with that preamble, let me deconstruct what is wrong with AI today and kind of ground it in terms of expectations that you might walk away from this room. So first and foremost, I think it's important to note that, like VC was saying, none of what you saw as demonstrations or as examples are actually, in any sense of the word, intelligent, right? So none of it is brilliant, none of it is intelligent. In fact, one of the earlier assumptions that people working in the field, was it's going to be quite likely that blue-collar jobs are going to go away and get automated. Like, think about manufacturing, think about people detecting simple things in the manufacturing shop floor or in service technician kind of work. And white-collar jobs are going to go last, and then people like me who are data scientists or AI practitioners, our job is going to go the last, right, eventually. It turns out that's the other way around. So a lot of what we do typically in the world of data and data science is getting automated. And a lot of what's happening, like VC was saying, in the white-collar space, radiologists, et cetera, they're also getting significantly automated. But what's going to eventually matter is how much of it is interfaced back with the human psyche, right? How much of it is going to be made real in a physical world? And that's where a lot of research is still happening, but that's also giving pause to the entire excitement around AI, because the human psyche, the way that human connections happen to AI need to be tempered, need to be balanced out. There is a context to everything, right? Almost all of our interactions have context, and those contexts are key to what makes intelligence work. And none of what you see today has that elaborate context. In fact, the best model today is like VC was saying, is just 60,000 words. Is that enough context for having an intelligent conversation? Maybe. Is that enough context for having human-like experiences? Probably not, right? So there is still, the debate is out and the word is out there. Let's break it down even further. I want to talk about like 3 or 4 major challenges that you see today with whatever is the state of the art in terms of AI. So I'm paraphrasing Robert Frost there. We don't have to worry about our sleep as yet, right? There's still miles to go. And the reason is like 3 main things, right? One is consistency. VC just touched upon it. What you see with today's AI is an extreme lack of consistency. Like, for instance, if you take the example of a baby, it takes a baby a little bit of time for it to learn that hot temperature means that it's getting harmed, so don't touch it, right? A boiling pot of water, etc. But once it's learnt it, it's not going to go back and repeat that mistake. Whereas with AI, that's not necessarily true. And the moment you say it's not necessarily true, you start to wonder, under what scenarios is it not true? Right? When does it stop, when does it actively phase out the learning that something is hot? Right? It's not clear yet. And the reason it's not clear yet is nobody understands how the learning happens. Not even Geoffrey Hinton, not even any of the AI practitioners. Nobody knows the mathematics behind it. It's not science in the sense of science, right? There is no explainable formulae. There is no research paper that says 5 things need to happen and then the 6th thing happens, right? It's not deterministic. It's probabilistic. It's picking up patterns, and it's making sense of patterns only as much as what the patterns can reveal. So in that sense, it's not even making sense, right? It's just putting a mishmash of patterns together. Is that intelligence? No, I'm not sure, right? That's where the debate is. But even more importantly, it's not able to arrive at a consistent way of answering the same thing expressed in slightly different forms, right? And that's something you have to watch out for. The second really important aspect of consistency is, can it improve over a period of time? So for instance, any learning system, again, if you take the evolution of babies or even animals for that matter, as they evolve, as they become more exposed to the life experiences, they tend to accumulate all of that information and become overall more intelligent, more sentient. Whereas with the black box AI systems, and I'm saying black box durability because nobody understands what's happening inside. It just looks like this laptop, right? And nobody knows what's happening inside. In that kind of a model, the extent of progress, the way we would like to measure it as humans, is not there, right? In fact, what recently there was this really interesting study that was done on ChatGPT and the models that power ChatGPT, which is called GPT, or general, basically these are transformer models. What these researchers found is, for the same type of tasks, which it did fabulously well, right, earlier this year, again 90, 100 days ago, versus the same tasks done now, there's a dramatic difference in terms of performance, right, in terms of accuracy. Now, again, these are prompt-based systems, prompt meaning text-based systems. So it's answering by text, right? And the extent to which it answers is dependent on the vagueness of the question, right? So if you ask a question like, is 17077 a prime number? Now, it'll just say yes or no, right? It's a very factual thing. We all get it intuitively. Anybody who's done math gets it. Like 5th standard mathematics students get it. But for an AI to reason about it, it's non-trivial, absolutely, right? There's no doubt about that. For instance, if you go type it today in ChatGPT, it'll lay out the algorithm. It'll say, find the square root of this number and go from 1 to all the prime numbers until the square root and see whether it's divisible. And if it's a whole number, then it's fantastic. Then we know it's not prime. If it's not a whole number, keep going until you hit that limit, and then it's a prime, right? That's exactly how I, as a computer scientist, would write an algorithm, and that's exactly how AI is solving for it, right? Which is very, very impressive. But then, if you ask it to slightly change this format a bit, right? So what these researchers did is they asked a whole bunch of these kinds of questions, and they found that in totality, across that entire set of questions, that same ChatGPT, GPT-4 specifically, one of the later models, while it performed 97% accurately in March, the accuracy dropped down to as little as 2.4% in June. I mean, nobody understands why, right? We can surmise it might be not related to the technology, it might be the company, OpenAI, which is probably cost-cutting, some measures are being adopted to cost cut, etc., etc. There are theories out there that say it's no longer just one model, and they have made micro models to deal with different sections of the world, right? Geography has its own model, math has its own model, etc. But these are just surmises. Nobody knows exactly what's happening inside. And that's part and parcel of it being a black box formulation. The other example here is tasks that require ambiguity inherently, right? Require also longer explanations. It's no longer, yes, it's prime, no, it's not prime. Like now you have to reason about things, right? And you have to walk through how the reasoning works out. And those are non-trivial. Those are non-trivial for humans. Forget about even AI, right? Like the examples that VC were talking about. The issue again is that wherever it requires ambiguity, the human context asks us to ask questions back, right? So we ask questions again to clarify. We ask more questions to bring out the rest of the context so that we know maybe there's a frame around which we need to get our answers out. AI doesn't do that, right? So it kind of makes a guess as to what the context is. And when it makes a wrong guess, you're left wondering, how do I change the prompt? How do I change the text? So again, if you go back to the way search was back in early 2000s, when Google first started to dominate the market. Before Google, there was just Yahoo, and Yahoo had just a elaborate yellow pages kind of directory. That's how search worked. Right? Google came in and said, just use free-form text, and this was back in 2001, right? 2002. Use free-form text. I'll figure out what you're trying to mean, and I'll give you some answers. Like, go back to those. Sorry, I keep hitting this. Go back to those times when you had to learn how to search. Right? You couldn't just type randomly anything that you wanted and expect to get the right answer. You had to learn how to search. You had to use certain keywords. You had to use double quotes to put context together, etc. Kind of like the same thing is happening with AI now. You need to learn how to share that particular context. And until you do that, AI is not good for ambiguous questions at all. Right? So just be careful about it, because the consistency in the results will go all over the place. One of the fascinating use cases of ChatGPT, which actually as companies we are all benefiting from, is this ability of the AI to generate code. Like, remember I said white collar jobs are going away faster? One of the main jobs that's going away is entry-level developers. Right? So again, 20 years back, Java developers are everything, Y2K problem, etc., etc. Fast forward to now, entry-level developers are no longer differentiated. Right? And that's the reality. So you could give it a problem statement like this, which is, given an integer n greater than 0, etc., etc. So it's just a very simple mathematical problem. AI can write the algorithm for it, give you code in Python, Java, Scala, C++, C, Shell, whatever, right? Doesn't matter. You just have to tell it, okay, give me code in one of these languages. Now, here's where the catch is. Like with all code, like with all of the answers that AI generates, it's not guaranteed that that code will work. Okay? So you'll have to take it with a pinch of salt. In fact, these same researchers, what they found was code quality can vary significantly. Same problem, asked in a different time of the day, asked like 3 months later, can produce slightly different code, and that code need not compile on day one, right? So, for instance, one of this statistic was back in March, 50% of the code that it was able to output in a sample set of problems was directly executable, which means you could just take it and run it in a machine, and it produces the correct answer, right? 50% of the time. By the way, that's an amazing result, right? For somebody who doesn't know development, who's not been taught programming. But that's a fantastic result. But the issue is that fast forward 3 months, so only 10% of that particular sample space is generating the right code. Now, the nuance here is that the reason the rest of the 90% is not directly executable is only because it's making small typos, right? It's putting too many double quotes, whereas the Python interpreter does not like double quotes in that particular order. Likewise, it's actually putting comments in a piece of code, and the commenting format is not accurate. Like, for instance, in Java, you have to put a comment with 2 backslashes, like for those who are programmers, sorry. But if you don't put it with 2 backslashes, instead you put it with a hash symbol, it's not a comment, it's just a mysterious line. So those kinds of small changes have to be done, but if you make the small changes, the code works. So it's not as though it's completely off either, but things to keep in mind, right? You can't just take an entry-level developer out and put AI and say everything works. That's not going to happen. The second class of problems is transparency. So one of the reasons why black box is such a big problem is, as humans, we like to build intuition about things. We like to build an intuition about how systems work, because that allows us to keep that in mind when we start to design solutions for real-world problems. The problem with black box models is that there's absolutely no intuition that actually is able to help you figure out what's happening within. So therefore, if you're asked a question, can AI solve for a specific problem, let's say world hunger? Maybe, right? Who knows? And that kind of an answer is not very helpful if you really think about it. Let's bring down the context to something very simple. I've got a bunch of images in my radiology clinic, right? The images pertain to whether a particular set of data points lead up to a prediction that that particular unborn baby is going to be having Down syndrome or not, right? So it's a very, very concrete problem. And this problem is very well understood in the world of radiology, right? The radiologists know exactly what to look for, certain markers are there, etc. And that took decades of science, right, to get to this stage. For AI to actually crack that problem, you need to be able to understand, is it looking at the same markers the same way that the radiologists are looking at? And there is no way to reason about it that way. Like VC was saying, you could train a system which is extremely good at only Down syndrome prediction by giving it only those data points, right, which matter. Like, which is kind of like saying, let me encode the expert knowledge that's there in the radiologist and feed it into a system and let it learn to do the same thing. But that becomes an extremely biased system. It can only do that and it cannot do anything else, right? So you've got this trade-off that you need to do when you start to work with black box models. Because you don't have the intuition of what's happening beneath it, there is no easy way to say, what I've done here will actually work there as well. You might end up creating a whole bunch of models which are very, very specific to very specific problem statements. And that's a much bigger problem because you can't just do that. The cost of every one of these experiments is very expensive. The second angle here is, there is the technology angle, there's a company angle, right? ChatGPT, of course, is the company's formulation of GPT, the underlying transformer model. Llama 2 is open source. Open source is better in certain parlance because you don't have to worry about the constraints of the company anymore, right? OpenAI as a company is here to make profit, just like any other enterprise is. It's not non-profit at all. So therefore, it's making some decisions which are maximizing its profit objective. Whereas with open source, you get to start to make your own constraints, make your own choices by adopting open source. So the transparency increases manifold as a result. But that's a choice, right? Everybody needs to make the choice specifically. And then last but not the least on transparency, if you ask ChatGPT today to explain how it came about with a specific answer, it'll give you a really good explanation, but it's not sentient of that explanation, right? Which means the same answer, if you ask it to explain, let's say 2 months later or 3 months later, the explanation can be different. And at that point, you're left wondering, which one do I trust? Which explanation makes sense? Which explanation is actually correct or wrong? So again, the transparency issue comes into play. A third set of problems which are there today with AI is what's called as data privacy. So today, if you see how GPT or ChatGPT in general has been trained, is on the entire World Wide Web, right? Which includes code bases, like Wikipedia articles, all kinds of research papers, websites which are public, etc., etc. So the moment you start giving your own prompts, your own text, right? Let's say, for instance, I'm giving my code and I'm asking ChatGPT to find a bug in it. It's possible. It's very much possible. ChatGPT is really good at those kinds of problem statements as well. What it's also doing is it's taking your code and adding it to the overall training. So that code is now part and parcel of its world of knowledge, just like Chennai International Center was, right? In VC's example. That might or might not be a good thing. That's up to you to work it out. Like, especially if you're running a company, is it wise to start sharing those kinds of information when the entire world will get to know about it in some shape and form? So that's something to keep in mind. That's data privacy. Like few more smaller problems, smaller relatively speaking compared to the previous three. Community support. Because of black box, because it's very early days, there isn't any single person who's actually going to help you make meaningful use of this kind of an AI. So one of the recent events that's happened is the founder of OpenAI, he was in Bombay about a month ago. So he did a press conference and whatnot. So one of the controversial questions that was asked was, should Indian technology companies look to build GPT-like models that is conducive for the Indian context? And his answer, without even blinking an eye, is no. Right? He said no. And the reason he said is, people like us, which is basically, he was referring to himself, right? OpenAI, Facebook, Google, etc. They have so much of manpower, so much of compute power, and so much of expert knowledge in building these kinds of systems that it's extremely cost-wise prohibitive for other countries which don't have that kind of investment capacity to go after, right? And try to solve for the same problem statements. So in a nutshell, he's saying that the community that's required for you to be able to create this kind of a innovation just doesn't exist in India. That was his contention. right? You could argue and say whether it's yes or no, etc., but community support is a vital thing, right? Do we have the kind of expertise here? I'm not sure. In fact, one of the other assessments that's done by these consulting companies, right, BCG, McKinsey-like companies, is that China and the US are way, way ahead in terms of AI expert knowledge to be able to build these kinds of systems. And of course, they have government support and all of that to be able to have that investment climate, the data sets, all of that. So that's there's a big leap that we need to make as a country if we need to tackle that particular question and prove them wrong. The second problem statement here is that for most practical applications of AI in our contexts, we would need to do what's called as custom training. The general purpose ChatGPT is great at overall wide body of knowledge at the 30,000 feet level, and at times it gets really good at going specific. But let's say you're a company that is into like telecom equipments, right? How do I improve the quality of my telecom equipment? ChatGPT is not going to solve for it, right? You have to do what's called as a custom training of that model specific to your situation. And that custom training, it's an art by itself. It's not a science, right? So you need to know which experiments to do, how will it fail, etc., etc. So again, a lot of work to be done there. And last but not the least, one of the problems with systems like this, which are black box, which doesn't have a science behind it, right? There is no explanation that it can give, is what's called as hallucination. So the word sounds very fancy. It sounds as though like somebody's taken opioids and imagining things. Obviously, this is not a sentient system, so none of it is actually happening. But in real, what we see as outcomes, right, is that it's making up information on the fly. And sometimes you don't even know whether that's actually correct or wrong. Like not even the synthesized images, right, that VC was referring to, even non-synthesized, even dynamic texts that it's actually trying to make sense of. Like for instance, this particular example here, what this particular prompt says is, I'm giving you a URL, just go summarize it for me in 100 words, right? And it came up with a summary. The catch here is that URL does not exist. Right? So that URL does not exist. New York Times didn't publish any article like what the URL might suggest, but it's made up stuff. Right? So where is it actually making up stuff from? Nobody knows. So that's what is referred to as hallucination. If you go try it out now they have taken a stance that says, hey, by the way, I'm not connected to the internet. I can't look at URLs like this. Sorry, I can't offer my opinion, right? But that's like the parachute jumping off from the plane kind of approach to solving these problems. But the more important thing is, it is making up stuff, right? And there is no way for us to know unless we have a counterbalance system which is actually verifying these results. Then the question becomes, am I using AI for solving a problem, or am I using AI to, do what, right? So something to keep in mind. Okay, so not all is bad though, right? I think VC made a point, a lot of things are good. I kind of made a point that a lot of things are not usable, right? But how do we balance the two? In my view, I think there are some very concrete ways in which there are benefits to be obtained even today, right? So first and foremost, it's a fantastic experimentation tool. Like one of the great ways in which you can experiment is, let's say you have a point of view, you can make AI take a contrarian point of view intentionally, and then you can go have a debate with it, right? And this can be for ambiguous problem statements, like for instance, gender equality, right? In a particular context. Or it could be for extremely factual things as well, right? One of the really latest examples is what's called as protein folding. It's a very time-consuming activity, it's extremely compute-intensive, and it's the fundamental foundational steps for the pharma industry for generating new kinds of molecules. So Google released a version of its AI which has cracked the problem statement of protein folding. Cracked meaning you just give it any protein, it will figure out what the structure is. Like protein folding, the problem statement is, given a protein, can I know what the structure is so that I know which protein molecules are, successfully managed to destroy. Okay, so which of the molecules are aligning in what way so that I know which receptors are available for my medicines to come and attack, etc., etc. So the way they went about doing it is using what's called as deep reinforcement learning. But the more important thing is they've experimented insanely, right? The types of experimentation that's possible is just amazing. Likewise, you could also use it as a really good experimentation tool for teaching education, right? For just pedagogical education in schools. It's a great way for encouraging students to actually play with and figure out, how do I answer a specific question, and give me ways in which my answer is wrong. But there are contrarian viewpoints that say ChatGPT should be banned from schools, but you're not going to get away with that kind of a diktat, right? Everybody's going to use it at some point or the other. Why not encourage creative thinking with that, right? So encourage experimentation in that mode. The second suggestion is absolutely test and verify every single output that AI produces. Please don't take it at face value. With enough examples, I think we discussed today. Third is the work that professionals do on a daily basis. I think that's prime territory for automation using even ChatGPT the way it is today, right? I'm talking developers, engineers, technicians, right? People who need to take a look at a whole bunch of digital data and make sense of it. Lawyers is a good example. So I think the bar exam passing is a phenomenal result, right? ChatGPT went and did the entire lawyer bar exam in the US. So those kinds of rote learning based daily work can easily be automated, certainly, right? And that's possible even today. Last but not the least, it can be a very good virtual agent in a team setting. So for instance, what we are doing in our company, we are using, one of the ways in which we are using ChatGPT is as a QA tester as part of our software development teams. So while we have regular QA testers as well, quality assurance testers, we're also having ChatGPT as one of the testers in our software development lifecycle. It's not doing a 100% accurate job, obviously, but then it's coming up with so many interesting corner cases in the code that we have written that it's not trivial, right? It's not funny at all. It's extremely interesting. What do you need to watch out for? The warnings that are there. Direct customer interfacing of ChatGPT has been proven to be time and time out again a problem. The reason being the results are not consistent. So you don't just take ChatGPT and put it on your website and say, hey, I have a chatbot that's ready. Any customer can come and interface with it. Be careful about those kinds of things, right? Second is, you can't take these kinds of tools and start embedding in your production setting. Production setting meaning, let's say, the manufacturing shop floor directly, because it's potentially not going to produce the same kind of result over a period of time. So there's no sense of a progression in the learning, right? And that's detrimental to many contexts of production usage of these kinds of technologies. So again, stay warned. Best would be you build your own custom model for your specific use case, and then you've tested it out with millions of different scenarios, and then that you take to production. That has way more confidence than directly using a model like this. Please don't trust ChatGPT for facts and opinions. It's going to give you nonsense at some point. And other points, it's potentially giving you, like VC was saying, a very biased opinion, right? Because it's not learned from the entire body of text that we have access to as humans, right? It's only learned from what it has access to. And nobody knows what it has access to fully, right? We just know it's the World Wide Web. And last but not the least, the use of black box models makes sense in very specific settings, like that example I was saying about Down syndrome prediction. But how many of those models can you do is a call that you'll have to make. Maybe you can do 10, maybe you can do 15, but can you do thousands? I mean, the cost is going to be super high. So that you have to balance it out. Thank you.
I had asked the speakers to demystify, and the look around the audience says a different story. They are more mystified than before. So we'll open up for questions, a few questions before letting the speakers go. Yes, please.
One is born out of our own experience. Both of you mentioned hallucination. This is a specific example of how much hallucination it can do. So we were trying to get our income tax appeal done through ChatGPT, and it came up with a citation of a Madras High Court, which didn't exist. So we went back and said, no, that doesn't exist. And they gave us an entire case law. And then I told my partner, obviously, it cannot think of an entire case law, go back and check. she confirmed that there is no such case law in the entire High Court. So this is the type of hallucination that it can lead to. My question is this: if today is this happening, and you have Elon Musk, Neuralink, and quantum computing and all that, so where is this going to lead us to?
Actually, this has happened in the US also. Somebody actually went and took the ChatGPT thing and then I think he was censured and all that by the court, and he had to pay a fine, right? See, let's understand one thing. Actually, I have some slightly different opinion. We are very comfortable about predictable, how we want it kind of results. But you tell me one human whom you'll totally rely on. I go to my friends. In fact, there are guys habitually they fib. They're very happy. They'll talk about any language. They'll talk as though he's a PhD scholar in the subject, right? That is exactly what ChatGPT is doing. It is like a human. That's all is my argument, right? And really, I think, this is a too generic, like you are expecting an expert to be everything. That's the problem. Very soon you're going to have, in fact, as I was saying, giving examples, you're going to have a legal model, right, which is going to be really sharp, which will definitely threaten the lawyers. Because the underlying mechanisms of training and then creating a product, it's available. You don't even have to write too much lines of code. With 300 lines of code, you can create an expert. That's all that is required. So don't compare the power of generative AI from only like how ChatGPT is performing today. That is very, very limited. And that's very, it has got a whole lot of issues. There are, for every ChatGPT unknown, there are specialist models which beat the experts hands down. Like as he said, the radiologist, you don't require a radiologist, right? One example is actually Google did an experiment on medical thing, right? For diabetic retinopathy. And they tried with, I think, I read about it a couple of years back, in fact. They started working with the Arvind Eye Hospital because they have this ocular scans. And now actually Arvind Eye Hospital is connected to the Google Cloud. The scans go wherever anybody is scanned for anything. It can get back and say, listen, this guy may be getting into diabetic retinopathy 15 years from now, right? Oof. That is a huge plus. And I was very, very surprised to look at it, right? Recently, just about 2 weeks ago, I had somebody who's got a European product. They've now discovered by analyzing all these retina scans that retina scans can tell you not just about ocular problems. It can tell you about a cancer in your liver. It can tell you about something else somewhere. How the biological system responds to a certain condition and where is it reflected and how it reads the patterns is something nobody understands, but statistically shown that actually just an ocular scan can point out to early detection of so many diseases which today no doctor can do. That's a fact. It's an incredible power. Just imagine Africa, what's the ratio of doctors to the population? What an immense, fantastic opportunity it is for to serve them. But the same thing actually can really create and replicate itself, and new form of intelligent viruses are going to come, right? That's the Jekyll and Hyde. So you can't, to answer your question, don't rely on ChatGPT, wait or locate your legal expert learning model. That will definitely answer your question.
I'd just like to add one.
Yeah.
You can build your own.
Yes.
That's even better.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation from both of you. My name is Shekhar. I am a student project advisor at IIT Madras. Very interesting, wonderful presentation. Couple of points. One is, don't you have legal and trademark issues when kind of data is being accessed? Even if you go to Wikicommons or Wikipedia, there are a lot of protection. Now, who owns the data? And you also mentioned that the moment you put the data, it goes to the cloud, and they use that. Chennai Information Center goes back to ChatGPT, remembers, and comes back. So obviously, would you be worried about sharing private data of yours, which ChatGPT will use for competition, for example. I could want Nissan to find out about Mitsubishi production techniques. Won't we have challenges, legal challenges like this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the main reasons why data privacy is a hot button area in this entire space. In fact, so much so that two different large-scale AI models, including ChatGPT, they've been taken to court in the US because the access to the data was for a different purpose from some of these websites. They were not meant for commercial generalization like what ChatGPT has done. So there were two separate lawsuits, one on OpenAI and another on Google more recently. Google also released their own version that's called as Bard. So these are very, very ethical issues, nascent issues, but they have to be solved in different contexts, certainly.
See, very definitely, I think the new approach is the general model gives you the general framework. Private data should be with private. How you actually connect both and have an intelligent system where private data is, in fact, a lot of people are doing this already, right? You can use the general intelligence available outside. You can use specific intelligence from your own thing, and then if you really train and have some really good thing, you'll be able to do that and protect also. I'm sure that, for instance, CMI, Algo Labs actually does a lot of consulting and work in this area. They have some products also created.
You have a question there?
Can I ask a question?
After that?
Hello, so I'm a student here at MSc. So, sir, my question to you is, when we're talking about all these artificial intelligence models and everything, this can be analyzed at multiple layers, and I'm not talking about the pros and cons that comes with this. My question to you is, if you look at it, like I just want to know your perspective, both of yours. Someone like who's worked on this for so long, do we actually need it in the first place? Like, if I think about a world without printing press, of course there are difficulties in it, but I can still imagine a world without printing press. So at a very, very fundamental level, and as someone who's talked about philosophy, Indian philosophy, so are we converging to the basics of humankind is my first question, and definitely I don't see any convergence to it. So I just want to know your perspective on this regards, my first question. And second question, something as a student of economics, I see artificial intelligence as merely as a tool to kind of, as a power, as a tool to kind of how a power is transformed. Like earlier days it used to be land, dry land, wetland, more agriculture, more power. And similar way, like the example he talked about, Mr. Rangarajan talked about, where the CEO or the co-founder of ChatGPT outrightly, explicitly mentioned not to work on it because it's just useless, like waste of money. And the power is kind of, if you think about it, the money is being concentrated out into the hands of few countries, like who has this technology. So it's more like, okay, the power has to be transformed from one world to another using this new tool. And so what do you think about it? What's your perspective on this? And do you see this rapid transformation of, rapid upgradation of technology breaking anywhere in the medium to long run, and any convergence towards the fundamentals of humankind?
We'll
Thank you.
take one more question and then we can answer together.
Hi, my name is Alok. So I have a technical question. So computer systems are very good at doing the deterministic tasks that you mentioned. Like for example, the chess playing systems are better than any humans, and they abide by those rules very, very diligently. So my question is, why can't you marry the statistical systems like ChatGPT or language models, etc., to also draw from a knowledge base of like maybe graph represented fact set, and give the best of both worlds? I mean, why? I mean, I know if it could be done easily, somebody would have done it. But what is the limitation in simple terms in doing that?
So, to answer your second question was about power, right? In terms of, I think what they are saying today is, today we have 3 large model players right now, which is like Anthropic or Llama, which is Meta, and you have OpenAI. You will have in another 2 years maybe 20 of them, and maybe about 4 or 5 years you may have at the max 200, right? That's what they're saying. But these are like very basic infrastructure, right? So you don't have to actually, I don't think it changes. Like for instance, Microsoft really has a predominant presence and monopoly on the operating system side, right? It is not really, because that's a basic infrastructure. And people have thrived in terms of creative applications on top of it. Similarly, I think there are opportunities outside of it. I don't think that is going to shift. But your ability to invest into this technology and put R&D money and then really be able to invest and sustain the whole thing, India will be able to do, but some African countries may not be able to do. And they'll be dependent. And the guys who got this control, actually it can proliferate so quickly, the distribution is so easy, that they'll have an eternal control on such poorer sections of the society. So that philosophically, to your question on that's a very, very difficult and big question, right? Why are we even working? Why are we having these economic systems? We can simply, because I don't think other species have all these complications like we have, right? It is all man-created in one sense. So if you were to take that kind of an opinion, I think AI is not required, right? That's why I said, I think it may be a good thing. We can chill out with whatever universal basic income that may be coming. And even if it doesn't come, I don't think life is going to stop. I don't think life cares about human race at a cosmic level, right? So we are too full of ourselves in one sense. So I would say that's a very difficult and deep question, and we cannot answer that at all, but it's really exciting to engage with that question. Thank you.
On that question of...
Yeah, maybe just one more line from my side. I'm a positivist with respect to these kinds of technologies. I think there's lots of fundamental problems that affects human life, like the protein folding example, which leads to better pharmaceutical combinations, better disease solving, etc. So those are really important problems that can be solved in the short term. In the long term, obviously, I mean, it's anybody's call, right? Coming to your question, I think the way that you were referring to how these systems used to be built before, the deterministic systems that you were talking about, fundamentally the technical specification for those kinds of systems is, if you really simplistically look at it, it's just a bunch of rules, right? That's what he was referring to as expert system. That's how AI systems were in the past. So one of the first chess-playing engines was IBM Deep Blue, and it beat Garry Kasparov eventually, one of the topmost grandmasters at that time. But it was hand-coded with a whole bunch of rules over many, many, many years, right? And to be able to get it to that level was an enormous amount of cost. Not anybody could do it, etc., etc. Now, fast forward to more recent times. Google had a fantastic breakthrough called as Alpha. So it basically learned to play chess without even knowing the rules. And it cracked it without having understood anything about the rules, right? So that's an example of a system that's on the opposite end of that spectrum. No rules encoded, no rules codified. Nobody needed to come and say, these were how you win games, right, etc., etc. Or a bishop had 3 points, queen has 9 points, etc. None of it is there. But it still figured out how to win. And it figured out how to win in a matter of 6 hours, right? 6 hours from zero knowledge to being the topmost engine, right? In computer, no, in human terms as well, right? In some of the, that entire Alpha Zero engine, there's a YouTube documentary about it. It's supposed to be even better than a super GM, like with 2800 LO ratings and so on. The crux of the matter is, there's only so much time you can invest in, specifying rules. And in most cases of practical problem statements that affect real life, the extent to which you can codify the rules are not known, right? You can't sit and think about what are the ways in which the rules govern world hunger, right? It's just impossible. So then you get a system that tries to figure out based on patterns of what's happening, based on macroeconomics, microeconomics, etc., right? It might still do something wrong, but at least it's a better shot at then trying to theoretically model a set of rules which are possible, which define that particular system. So technically, the probabilistic answers that these machines give, like I said, are great for experimentation and might be leaps ahead compared to the theoretical models that you can come up with if you were to just sit in a room and think about the problem statement day in, day out for years together. And that's a big leap.
Yeah, so if I will just add, my question was like, can it marry the, can it do?
It's already happening, right? In fact, AlphaZero itself, while the first version and the version that became extremely popular had no rules, there's an open source version called Leela. And Leela is also an open source chess playing engine. It was built on the same tech stack that AlphaZero was built on. There, some bit of rules are actually given to it. So these kinds of marriage of deterministic systems with probabilistic learning, it's happening all over the place anyway today, right? It's not novel in that sense.
So we'll take the last two questions, one question here and one last question there.
One very elementary question. You said that the chat GPT may not be consistent in answering the same question over time. Does it mean that when it answers a question at a particular point in time, it does not retain that memory when it answers a similar question sometime later?
See, as I told you, ChatGPT does not even know what it is saying. Right? It constructs one word at a time, right? There is, in all these things, there is some parameter in these learning models called temperature. Okay, temperature is the one which actually they say is giving its that creative space, right? So if you increase the temperature, it goes wild. It can generate really wild ideas and questions. If you set the temperature to 0, it will give you consistent, reliable answers. But I don't know whether that's the best thing to do, because you really want them to think like a human, because you can't, I mean, Osho once said, saying that he answered a question in the morning, said, is marriage good? He said, marriage is terrible. Nobody should marry anything. It's an institution. Who will be in an institution and all that? Evening, he just said the opposite. He said, marry everything. I think marriage is the best thing. Somebody in the thing stood up and asked, hey, listen, morning you said like this, evening you said, what is this? He said, you want a teacher or a tape recorder? So it is like that. In a way, what I'm saying is, it's a feature that, similarly, if you ask me to give the lecture once again, I may not say the same thing, correct? That is the element of that generative AI. So if you remove that and want consistency, then you're really wanting it to answer what you want.
So this temperature is a real parameter? Or?
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah.
Last one, please.
Good evening. My name is Archana. You pointed out that the learning models of AI is a black box. There's no transparency on how the learning happens, and that is an inherent danger. But I want to understand it better, because even search engines which we use today are a black box. They're inherently, we don't understand what is the algorithm that is being used. But why is it specifically more dangerous for an AI? Because most of the information we get now is through search engines, which are also a black box, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, I guess you're looking at it from the end consumer perspective, which is right. But I guess I'm using the term black box from a perspective of even insiders in the industry. Even the insiders in the industry don't understand what is actually happening. Whereas if you go to any, like today, computer scientists in any college, if you ask them how a search engine is constructed, they will tell you exactly these are the 3-4 algorithms you would need, and these are the open source projects you can assemble, put together and build your own search engine, right? And that's very well understood in terms of the science of it. Whereas here, it's black box even for the industry experts.
Not for the industry, the developers. Black box for the developers.
Developers, yeah, all of it. The entire AI industry does not actually understand how it works.
Yeah. See, I think our own learning model is like that. It's a black box. How we actually know something as what we know, nobody knows, right? And they are just, I think they've created mathematically a system which actually does exactly that. And that's the power of the whole thing.
Well, that has been fascinating. But I would encourage all of you, despite all those worried and mystified looks, do try it. It gives you a very basic framework it gives you. Now, whether you want to accept it or want to improve it and all that, I've been trying it for some time and I am blown. I mean, it gives you that structure that you would want to answer a particular question. it doesn't give facts. It gives misleading facts in many a time, and it also gives you a point of view. But it helps you develop. As you keep on questioning it and refining it, it starts giving you more and more answers which you can really use. So I do encourage all of you to play around with it. It's very simple. Because I kept asking my son, he finally said, figure it out yourself. And that was the best thing he could have told me, because there's nothing really to figure out. Whatever you want to ask, you just ask. Expand, contract, improve. These are the prompts that we give, and it keeps on generating something. So do use it. Thank you very much, both of you. You kept the audience engaged, and we just touched the tip of the iceberg. I know that things, the next time we call you, you'll have a completely different, not only a PPT, but a new perspective on this whole subject. So as it goes on, we'll keep on coming back to you from time to time. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today. And we have again a series of events coming up. Sabris, would you like to brief them on the next events, please?
Hello everyone, good evening. So the next event is on August 4th. We have Maps of Madras, since it's the Madras week. So we have Maps of Madras. And then on 11th, we have Bharat 100. It's done by Dr. Rajiv Kumar. He is the ex-vice chairman of Niti Aayog. He is giving the talk on August 11th. And on August 19th, we have people coming talking on advertising. How advertising from Ravi Verma, how things have changed from that time to now. So we have a talk about it. So these are the events planned as of now, and we are planning more in August. We'll inform you in future. Thank you.
We also have a literary festival coming up in Pondicherry. In association, Auroville is doing it, and we are also partnering with them. We will be circulating the LitFest among all our members, so whoever is interested can join in the LitFest at, I think it's from 25th of August for 2 or 3 days, and we'll circulate to all of you, and if you are interested, you please attend that too. So thank you very much. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week.